his jacket in an attempt to block the chilling wind. His body was cold and his stomach begged for him to give it food. It had been a week since he had a real meal, and it did not help that every store had been a week since they had stocked their shelves, and they were advertising Thanksgiving dinner. He would lay and stare at the advertisements of freshly roasted turkey and dressing with the cranberry sauce, his mouth watering at the thought. It had only been 6 years since his last Thanksgiving, but he could almost taste it. Nick had come so far from that loving home, and now the streets were his residence. Residence. I guess this is the best. The street was his home. When he could not take the ache anymore, Nick found his way to the local soup kitchen. If he had ventured there sooner, he may have been in luck, but the wares had been cleaned out by the homeless of the city hours ago, and the doors had been closed. Nick's feet shuffled down the street towards a small diner. He hoped he could find some scraps among the trash to settle the argument his body was having with his mind. His fingers plucked through the rotting debris that most people would never consider consuming, but Nick was desperate. His search distracted him from everything else. A gentle tap on Nick's shoulder startled him. Most people avoided the homeless like the plague, but at this moment, Nick had been approached. He turned to face a rather well-dressed young man with clean-cut brown hair and a tailored suit. The man's blue eyes seemed to twinkle a bit behind his cheery smile as he extended a gloved hand outward toward the far less clean man across from him. Nick shakily took the person's hand and shook it, more out of reflex than anything. He had been raised to give a firm handshake to anyone who had offered. The idea felt sick when he pondered it. "My name is Benjamin," the young man said, breaking the silence. "Nick," the older man's voice cracked. "It looks like you could use a good home-cooked meal." Benjamin's teeth showed from behind an even bigger smile. Nick's eyes grew wide at the prospect of real food, and his stomach growled in acceptance of the offer. Before he had truly thought of his choice, Nick was guided to a small car and asked to take a seat. As soon as Nick placed himself within the vehicle, his body instantly felt warmer. The heating system poured warm air through the vents, and it was like a piece of heaven. Nick had forgotten even existed. Benjamin returned to the driver's seat and started down the road and away from the dark alley that Nick had sweet home. Nick stepped out without a word, his mouth hanging agape at the spectacle. He was guided up the steps and through the entryway. He found himself standing in a gigantic foyer with highly polished marble floors. The light from the chandelier above reflected on the stark white surface like stars. A tall gentleman approached Nick and reached for his coat. Nick allowed it to be removed, and the man gently hung the tattered garment in a closet near the front door. When the man returned, they were ushered into a large dining hall to the left of the foyer. The tables sat a good 24 people, and each seat was filled except for two seats. We are so glad you could join us this evening. Benjamin's mother stared and stated strongly with yet some gentleness behind it. Yes, it is so good to share this holiday with people who truly know what it means to be thankful, the father replied with a much deeper tone. Thank you, Nick's voice shyly came, not sure how to take all of this in as he took his seat. For every well-dressed man or woman, there was a person of lesser dress to their side. Benjamin had been right. Each family member had plucked somebody from the streets to share their Thanksgiving dinner. He wondered how he would ever have heard of such a thing, because he had never had before. Certainly an act of such generosity would get some sort of media attention, right? He silently reserved the fact that he would have to make sure these people were commended for their caring act. Each of the homeless around them sat eagerly awaiting their meal, and within 15 minutes of idle chatter, the first course was brought to the table. Plates of mashed potatoes with gravy, corn pudding, green bean casseroles, and the like were staged about the table as they were served in neat, tugging quick. Nick was no exception. His body almost acted of its own will as the proportions were shoveled from the dinnerware to his waiting mouth. As the plates were cleaned and the tables were cleared, the family that had hosted them all took their wine glasses. The father rose and smiled at their guests as he toasted to the family and their tradition. He gave a small speech about being so thankful for his family and friends like the ones they shared this night with. He then turned to his wife and the rest of his family and asked that everyone at the table give thanks for one thing in their life that they truly felt blessed for having. Each person took their turn, stating things like friends, family, jobs, security, and mutual adorned love for each other. The father then asked their guests to do the same and received more meager replies like warmth, food, clothes, shelter, and a repeating statement of this meal. The father gave a hearty chuckle. Well, yes, of course. Can we play the game now? A small boy near the end of the table squeaked. Soon we have to explain the game first, the father replied. The boy plopped in the mother's lap and pouted. Okay. You see, my friends, we have one more family tradition. The father stepped to Benjamin and patted him on the shoulder. It was Benjamin's idea when he was younger, and we have enjoyed his idea every year since. Now that you are full and rested in your seats, we are going to play a little game, Benjamin said while standing. Yes, the person who brought you will give you a choice, and you must make the choice, the mother said sweetly. Nick had always liked party games and shifted in his seat a bit to see what this would be. Benjamin rounded Nick's chair and leaned down with that same smile. The rest of the family stood as well and stood by each of their guests. Nick listened intently as Benjamin whispered in his ear the choice he would have to make. Nick's smile quickly faded as he pushed himself away from the table. His body shook as he slowly rose from his chair and looked around the room at all the frightened faces that had just learned the truth. The room almost started to spin at the notion of what he had been asked to do. All of them jumped as the doors around them were bolted shut and the younger guests began to cry for help. Yes, that's right, said the father. You must either kill yourself or everyone else. Those are the only two ways you are leaving this room. Benjamin placed a pocket knife in Nick's quivering hand. Good luck, buddy. The family disappeared out the remaining open door as the homeless inhabitants attempted to flee. They were shoved back by guards armed with submachine guns and instructed to remain in the room. Their only means of escape was slammed shut, and the sound of clanking metal signified their entrapment. Nick stared around the room at half a dozen men, 4 women, and 2 children that could not have been men scrambled to the corner of the room and attempted to open one of the doors. One of the women followed and struggled with the doorknob. A large man across from Nick pulled a length of chain around the neck of the smaller man beside him. The small body lifted from the ground, and a sickening crack echoed in the dining hall a few moments later. This sound caused one of them to scream realization of how pointless all of this was. He wished desperately he had never accepted the invitation, but it was too late for that. He had to figure a way out. How to get out of this horrific place. As he contemplated an escape, Benjamin rounded his side, still brandishing that stupid smile. served as testimony that my family was determined to follow, and now it was that time again. My siblings and I assisted my mother with the preparations for dinner. Normally, Father would be the one responsible for the meal preparations, but unfortunately, he sadly lost his mind one day and was bedridden. I never understood what happened. He was a big, burly man who was a master with his hands, but he started to become sick until he eventually forgot all of his bodily functions. Through it all, my mom kept a face, bizarrely not taking much notice of my father's ailments. Odd. My mother then legitimately took charge of the festivities. We collected the pots and pans and gathered into the kitchen. My mom looked irritated at first, but at the same time relieved to see us all. We placed the pots and pans on the ground surrounding the table. From the circumstances, that was the end of my ring light battery. I apologize. It's better for sleep and a little bit creepier. We placed the pots and pans on the ground surrounding the table. From the circumstances, I could see why my mom was annoyed. Strapped to the table was a woman, the sedatives having long since subsided. My brother and I were appointed with quote-unquote shopping for this year's main course. We stalked this woman at a gas station, and then we played the whole injured man trick to get her sympathy. We had assisted her in helping us with putting something in the car. When the time was right, my brother drugged her with chloroform. Now she was fully conscious and well aware of what was to become of her. Please, please let me go, she screamed against her restraints. She was tied down with chains that were ripping into her flesh. My mom turned to my brother with a motioning gesture. He walked towards the woman and ripped her clothes off, exposing her nude body to me and my younger siblings. My mother looked at me disapprovingly. I have told her continuously whenever Thanksgiving would be on the horizon that we should not indulge in murdering people. But every time I tried to reason with her, she was clearly not interested in my objections. You know, your older brother used to say the same thing as you did when he was your age. I shook my head. It took me a few years, but I thoroughly instilled the importance of this tradition into him. She wrapped her arm around my shoulders in a false sense of understanding, and soon you will learn it as well. I tried to sleep that night, but the image of this woman naked and screaming for mercy never left my mind. I tossed and turned in my bed, not wanting to disrupt my other siblings. We all shared a single bedroom while my parents resided in a room adjacent to ours. Quiet as a mouse, I crawled out of my bed and cautiously opened the door. I stopped in my tracks and I heard a low droning coming from my parents' room. From the masculine pain voice, I could tell that it was my poor father still suffering from his excruciating ailments. I had no idea what should have been done to help him. He came from a long line of family who were sternly against going to the hospital for medicine or appointments, even if it resulted in members of his bloodline having shorter life expectancies. Mom always said to us that we could expect our dad to be absent for next year's Thanksgiving. It was hard for me to explain to my younger siblings the exact words behind what her mother would say, since she never used the word die or death. Whenever we acquired a meal, she would present the occasion as a series of games. The floor creaked slowly underneath my feet as I entered the kitchen. I walked towards the cupboard to retrieve a glass for some water. I nearly dropped the full cup on the ground when someone spoke out to me in the darkness. "You're still up too." I narrowed my eyes. I could barely make out the silhouette figured before me, but the voice was recognizable all the same. My brother. My brother sat noiselessly on the table that the woman was on earlier in the day. He clasped his hands in his head, on his head. From there we had a common understanding. We were both disturbed to what had transpired that day. "What are we supposed to do?" I asked him. My brother shook my head. "How well do you know our mom?" What? I was confused by his words, but I decided to cooperate with him. I nodded in my head, but only elicited a shallow sigh from my brother. He got up from his chair, motioning me to accompany him outside to the porch. We both became robbers. We slid out of the house in dreadful silence, and we sat down on the bench. My brother rubbed his eyes a couple of times as a means of coming to terms with what he was about to share with me. started to slip him these as he held out his hand to reveal little white pills. From there, I slowly gained the realization that she was heavily drugging my father until he couldn't even as much form a comprehensible sentence or have a rational thought. He gradually melted down into a docile state, which gave my mom total control, free rein to do whatever she saw fit. While she loved to claim that we did what was necessary for remembrance of our ancestors, it was now clear to me that she was truly only interested in killing for killing's sake. I discovered the drugs earlier this month, my brother explained. When I confronted Mom on it, she started to heavily drug me until I was susceptible to listening to her demands without questioning them. We looked at each other in the darkness wordlessly. Thoughts spiraled uncontrollably about what the next course of action should be. We walked back into the kitchen, noticing the simmering meat on the stove. From there, an idea sprung into my mind. When my brother left for the bedroom, I added a special ingredient to the meat. I found it underneath the kitchen sink. After thoroughly soaking the meat in the concoction, I sprinted back to my bedroom. The next day, my siblings and I sat around the table with my mom. She had a stern look in her face. It almost made me worry what she heard me and my brother talking about. If she heard us walking around, sneaking out. But luckily that was not the case. Mom stretched out her hands and bowed her head. We did the same and we said grace over the meal. The meat was brought out along with mashed potatoes, ham, and stuffing. The blood and brain matter gave the stuffing its moist texture. The main course was sprinkled with salt and pepper and was tendered enough for a knife to slice through it. My brother and I cut some pieces of the meat and distributed it each to our siblings. Lastly, we served our mom. My younger sisters were about to dig into their meals, but my brother and I stopped them the moment their forks penetrated the meat. "What is the meaning of this?" Mom asked. "Oh, just that when you and I were preparing the meat yesterday, I decided to put in a secret ingredient." "Secret ingredient?" My brother injected. "Oh, yeah, we wanted Mom to try it out first." My mom looked at us suspiciously for a couple of minutes, and then shrugged her shoulders and slowly bent her fork down to pick up the first chunk of human flesh. She dragged it to her mouth, rolled it around, and with her tongue she sucked on the meat momentarily before chewing and swallowing it. "Oh, there is one more thing that we need to ask you, Mom," I said. she said anything more, I withdrew the bottle from yesterday and allowed her the time to look it over. Sweat beat down from her forehead. The ruse was realized. The secret that my mom had kept under lock and key was exposed. The bottle in her son's hand was the damning evidence. Mrs. Patterson's heart beat fastly like an ethereal drum, making her feel more distressed. She clasped at her chest from the pain. I looked at the panic in my mother's eyes from her full realization that something was horribly wrong. Her stomach was souring from the meat she had consumed. I had nothing but the utmost hatred for her, but I couldn't bring myself to fully like what became of her. I knelt to her with a half smile. So, Mom, how does the meat taste? It tastes bitter, she replied. The poison was now working its sinister magic in her bloodstream. She dropped her fork on the floor, clutched at her throat. She was in excruciating pain. Vomit began projecting from her mouth in volumes. She clawed herself up from her seat and fell on the floor, convulsing and frothing at the mouth. Her eyes became bloodshot from her ruptured veins. She held her hand out to me and my brother, only to watch in horror as we collected our remaining siblings and dashed out the kitchen. Not too long after my mom expired, my brother and I decided to completely cleanse us from our sins by setting the house ablaze. My brother admitted to his involvement with other disappearances, the previous Thanksgivings, and sentenced to 9 years in prison. As for myself and my siblings, we found ourselves in different foster homes because of the lack of